Hi everyone, and welcome to the Salon, where we invite faculty to bring some of their most interesting thoughts out of the lecture halls and into the common room. My name is Joshua Teperowski Monrad, and I'm here with Professor Shelly Kagan. Welcome, Professor Kagan. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so before we get started discussing today's topic, I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about which areas of philosophy you've worked in and what they are all about.
The basic area of philosophy that I work in is called normative ethics. That's the part of moral philosophy where we focus on trying to establish the basic principles of right and wrong, what makes an action permissible, morally required, or forbidden. And we ask about the details of these rules, which rules can be justified, and what their ultimate foundation might be.
So, in brief, why do you think philosophy matters, and why should everyone take some time to study philosophy?
I think there are two basic reasons for wanting to study philosophy. One is practical, and the other one I think is actually deeper. But let me start with the practical reason. Everybody wants to be good at thinking critically about whatever it is they go into. And different disciplines, of course, each to some extent will work on trying to help you get better at learning how to investigate, how to question, how to put together arguments for or against various positions. But if you were to ask which particular discipline puts that kind of concern front and center, I think the answer is going to be philosophy. So that's the practical reason for doing philosophy. What I think is the deeper reason for studying philosophy is that philosophical questions are questions that everybody cares about, and there's no other part of academy where you're going to really address these questions, again, front and center. We wonder how we could know anything about the world at all. When we try to investigate the world with our sciences, we use our senses. How do we establish the reliability of the senses? Well, we might try to do that by doing more science, but then of course what we're doing is using the senses to establish the justification of the senses. Is that justified or isn't it justified? How can we know anything about the world? What is the world like? What should we do about it? These are questions that everybody cares about, though most people have learned to put them aside and not really focus on them. Philosophy gives you the opportunity to think about them again and do your best to consider the various answers that have been put forward over the millennia.
So, some people might be concerned about the implications of philosophy for the broader real world. Can you provide some examples, some historical examples, where the study of philosophy has had direct influence on the way we think intuitively, or perhaps in the way we've organized our society?
So let's just take a particular area where I think some of the payoff is fairly straightforward, or at least some of the implications are fairly straightforward. Think about something like political philosophy. So we live in America under a constitutional regime. The founding fathers who were putting together the Constitution were very conscious about the various kinds of rights that they thought that citizens would have, and what a justified government would look like, and how the government had to be beholden to the people. These were ideas that they got from an earlier generation of philosophers, including, for example, Locke. And so it's not that ideas about what the Constitution should look like come out of thin air, out of whole cloth. Rather, they're drawing on the philosophy that they had taken in with their education. To turn to a more contemporary example, whether for good or for ill, many people in the government right now are of the opinion that a legitimate government has to be restricted very much. A kind of welfare state has no justification. Think about some of the claims that sometimes get made to the extent that there are the people who are productive in society, and we have to avoid having a welfare state because this gives gifts to those who are undeserving. These ideas, which now are extremely influential in contemporary politics, themselves are ideas that people got to a significant extent by reading Ayn Rand. A novelist who was trying to put forward philosophy, political views, moral views, and the like. Now, my own view is she wasn't a particularly good philosopher, and these ideas shouldn't have the influence that they do on contemporary thought. But for all that, there again, there's no avoiding being influenced by philosophy. The question is just whether you're going to be self-conscious about the philosophical ideas you're taking in and analyze them and see whether they withstand scrutiny.
All right. Well, I suppose this explains why the combination of ethics, politics, and economics is such a popular major here at Yale. Another interdisciplinary major that has philosophy in it is the connection between philosophy and physics. Indeed, the study of physics was one called natural philosophy. How do you see the link between these two fields?
All right, so on the particular topic about philosophy and physics, that's actually a nice illustration of one of the sorts of things that philosophers do when thinking about various disciplines. Physicists worry about the change of matter in space and time. Philosophers of physics worry about what exactly is space, what exactly is time. Physicists worry about what causes something else to happen. Philosophers worry about what is the very notion of causation. Physicists will tell us that quantum mechanics suggests that we need to revise our logic. A philosopher might ask, what would it even mean to revise our logic? Are there alternative logics besides classical logic that can be made coherent? What are the standards of an acceptable logic? And if so, might different logics be better or worse for doing physics? So what a philosopher of physics does isn't normally trying to answer rather physical questions about what's the best theorem here, what scientific theory is right or wrong, but philosophers of physics will investigate the underlying conceptual apparatus that physicists are putting forward.
What is one thing you wish your students knew about you? Here's your chance to tell it to them.
One thing that I wish the students knew about me. I have no memory for facts. I sometimes actually share this with my students, that I deliberately went into philosophy so I wouldn't have to learn any facts. So when I'm lecturing about, let's say, free will, and the question is whether or not free will can be combined with determinism, I start talking about, well, a psychologist might try to explain some choice I made in terms of my prior preferences, and these were themselves influenced by some earlier state of my mind or my body or what have you. But I never attempt to fill in the details of how that would go, because I don't actually know any of the details about how that would go. I don't have the kind of memory for retaining these sorts of facts, and so although I have a feel for how disciplines work, I'm very bad at actually recalling the details.
Interesting. You hide it very well. All right. My final question is from our previous guest on the show, Professor Paul Bloom, and he asked the following. What has disappointed you in academia?
So one disappointment I have it has to do with grading. I'm well known at Yale for having a rather hard line about grades. And I know that many students think it's just kind of the sadistic streak in me. As I try to explain, whether successfully or not, to my students on the first day of my classes, Yale students are so talented that I think we're doing them a disservice when we just act as though everybody's done A work all the time, or at worst you've done B+ work or something like that. If I were to say to a student in written comments on a paper, this was good, but really it wasn't great because you didn't deal with these problems adequately, it's very common for the student to come back and say, yeah, you're right. If I were to give that paper then a B, because Yale tells me that B means good, and A means excellent, then the student gets upset. Why you give me a bad grade? Wasn't this a good paper? And then the answer is supposed to be, no, it was a good paper, but it wasn't a great paper, and that means B, not A. Why don't undergraduates know this? Because most of my colleagues lie to students routinely. And that embarrasses me, and it lowers my sense of respect for my colleagues. If you're getting an A in absolutely everything, then of course, how do you know what you really are any good at, or especially good at, and might want to choose to pursue further?
Right. To finish up, I would of course like for you to supply a question to our next guest here at the show that you would like them to answer.
I have sometimes found when turning to colleagues in other departments, when I've just put to them, on whatever the occasion might be, why should a student take a class in your field? I've been surprised that they often don't have an answer ready, as though their attitude is, well, if you like this stuff, that's fine, and if you don't, you don't. So the question to put to the very next person you ask is, why should anybody study your field?
All right. Well, here from the Salon, thank you for watching. This has been Joshua Teperowski Monrad with Professor Shelly Kagan.
Thank you.
On my Yale bucket list. I felt like when the admissions office read my essay, they kind of just like read it and they're like, wow, she struggled so much to get here, like let her come.